and the lake on the other. And 2 has to pick up population from the districts that are up above. It can't get it all from 5 because 5 is so rural as you go on into the 4th. So you're going up to 2 and 4, to 4 and 5. 1 and 4. I have to look at the map. I'm doing 40 of these, and so I get the numbers wrong. But as you go up, 4 has a significant minority population, but we've already protected 3, and we don't want to reduce 4's population minority by anything more than we have to, because that makes it retrogressive. So you end up pulling from others, and that's why you see in that neck sort of an uncouth look. Most of why it looks uncouth is what I mentioned before. It's the golf course, because y'all have sort of gone through back and forth in that golf course. Yeah,
let me have Erica project. Please project Erica. He's on A1. First one.
Thank you.
And we can look at it from there, I think, if you make it full screen. Mm-hmm. Sorry to interrupt. I just
no,
want to make
right.
sure you could reference something.
Do you mind if I just walk up there?
No, you go right ahead.
So the original 3 is right here. And each one of these dots represents 5 minority residents. Coming down here, there's nowhere else to go. Anywhere else you go, you're lowering the minority concentration with no excuse. You can't say, well, I had to balance population, because you can balance population by coming here. So I don't really care. Well, I guess I care, but I don't think you can find someone who can draw a map that satisfies the voting rights act that doesn't do that. And once you've done that, now in 2, you've got to figure out where to get the people. And if you're going up here to 5, look at the concentration. It's heavy here, but if you go in here, where's 5 going to go? 5, you don't want 5 going up into 4, because it's got a minority concentration. So you go up past 5 and you start picking up some of 4, and you pick up some of 5. You have to pick up some of 5 to get up here. And then you pick up some of 4, even though you know the 4's got a concentration. But if you look here, there's really no minority concentration in the area that you've gone up to on the east of 4. So in a nutshell, that's why the lines look the way they do. And in all honesty, I don't know how else. We can change some things around up here, but we're sort of moving deck chairs on the Titanic. We can straighten out some lines if that's important. I'll promise you that nobody that votes for you knows what the lines of the district look like. They don't know if they're squirrely looking or if they're straight. But if that's important, we can figure out ways to sort of straighten them out. The only other thing that's a little issue is, and this issue has existed, it didn't exist before 10 years ago, but for some reason 10 years ago it was important to split some census blocks right out here where 1 and 4 meet, and in doing that we had to do some pocket counting. If there's still a reason for that to exist, we would still do some more pocket counting. But what this green line does is it splits a fairly large census district that doesn't have a lot of population. And so it's something that's easy to retain. It's something that's easy to get rid of. And that really is not a legal question. It's a question for this board. So in a nutshell, that's why this thing looks the way it does. And there are times when I have a lot of choice. I just spent this morning doing 3 different possibilities for a county. And every one of them looks very different because of the way their minority percentage is distributed. There's not a lot here that gives you much of an opportunity other than to sort of nudge around the edges of things. If we don't do that, you're subject to, and you would lose, a voting rights challenge. And once you've done that, you just almost have to go up the way I went. So that's why the lines look the way they do. I'm not here to say, okay, I'm telling you how to do it. I'm really not. I'm trying to. I'm telling you what I think the law compels from a result. Now, if there's some other ways to get there and honor the minority voting strength, I'd be happy to explore it with you. I brought the computer, we can set it up, we can sort of game it. But I've done that. This is the result of things that I thought looked worse, but I'm happy to explain further. I'm happy to get the computers out. I'm happy to go home. I want to be useful to you. So how best should I proceed? Yes, sir.
So is the map A1, is this the map that you recommend based on the criteria of balancing the 5 areas? What was it in our meeting, like 12-5? Is that what it was? And then you have percentages of minorities that you have to protect.
You have to get, you have to get your maximum deviation. Let me back up. I don't want to generalize too much. It's a good question. When your maximum deviation, and that's simply taking the number of people difference between the population of the highest and the lowest populated districts. When you take that number and you divide it into, as a percentage, you divide the total number into that and get a percentage of the ideal district. So if every one of your 5 districts had the same population, that's your ideal. You divide that into the difference between the high and the low. That gives you the deviation. If your deviation exceeds 10%, it's presumptively unconstitutional under the 5th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. It's not necessarily unconstitutional if there's an excuse. We couldn't get it below 10%, or we couldn't avoid it being above 10% because, except there's a county in California with the mountain range runs right down the middle of it. There are not enough people over here. They are above 10% because it doesn't make any sense to force people over the mountain where there's no pass. They have to go around. And so that's a justification. There's no justification in Central Texas for being above 10%. Y'all are a lot of it. I was at a school district last night in Waco where they were 22%. I've got another client that was 75% out of whack because they had a lot of growth and it was all in one place. So when we get it down below 10%, we get the presumption of constitutionality on one person, one vote. We could go lower than that, but you don't get a ribbon for going lower than that. And going lower doesn't mean that 10 years from now you're less likely to have to redistrict because the growth is not going to continue to be spread out. It's going to be concentrated. So by going a lower percentage, I can add more people to 3. But as I add more people to 3, you can look at where we go, and there is nowhere that I can go that I don't continue to lower the percentage of minority voters. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that I lower that percentage when I didn't have to for one person, one vote, not only is it retrogressive, but I don't have a good excuse. And it's the absence of the good excuse that kills us. Going over 10%, if you've got a good excuse, you can rebut the loss of your constitutional presumption favoring constitutionality. If you argue that, well, we had to get as low a deviation as possible to balance population, but in doing so, you impair the minority district, that's also not a good excuse because getting below 10 is the key. Going to 5, if it hurts a minority profile, or if it does damage to if it pairs incumbents, if it destroys a core group that has a community of interest. There are a lot of justifications for not going down into further and further.
So this map, A1, it hits the mark. We're inside the deviation.
This map, I think, would survive a legal or a constitutional challenge.
Okay.
But
So what I'm asking is, and please don't take this wrong, but I'm a floor guy. So if you bring me into your house and ask me my professional opinion on something in the flooring business, you brought me there for a reason and you should listen to what I give you as far as advice goes. We've brought you in here to be an expert on this. If this is the map that hits all the points, I don't feel qualified to argue with you about any of it.
okay.
So why could I add anything to this conversation that's going to change the constitutionality that you balanced and made this 100% right to protect us as a district? So I would say if there's a couple of folks in here whose districts are affected the most, because I'm at large, if those may be the folks we may need to ask if they have a concern. If not, I think we should move forward.
Well, to use your floor example, you would want to know what color I like.
Maybe.
Depends on what you
Don't call me in as an expert unless you wanna hear my advice. So, yeah, I get the design part of it, but the nuts and bolts is what I come in for.
Legally, there's nothing wrong with this.
So it's a good map, it's solid,
It is.
but it's the people like three, who else is bothered the most?
I'm not bothered. but
Or
it's-
affected
yes,
the most,
affected.
2 and 3?
2, 3, and 4.
2, 3, and 4?
A little bit
So
more fun.
maybe that's where the concerns could possibly come from.
I guess my question is, and again, I don't have much background knowledge on any of this because I've never gone through this, but in your years of experience, what kind of implications would you see with 4 and 5 losing to 2 and 2 losing to 3? I mean, what kind of implications? None.
The point is, not doing that either requires us to impair 3's voting strength, or it requires us to further depart from the 1 person, 1 vote maximum deviation requirements. I told you when I first met with y'all that this is not a good looking map. It's not. Its principal virtue is, I don't know that you can get a better looking map that satisfies the requirements.
But something else I feel good about with this process is we just witnessed down in Austin what happens when the Congress people and the people that they pay, what happens when they have a say-so in where the lines are drawn. We come into this pretty innocently, relying on someone who does this for a living to do what's best for our district. We're not making a donut in Bell County to protect or gerrymander. This is a pretty innocent process that I don't know that if what we could do better is what I'm saying, to challenge anything that you've done, even though that neck and 2 is kind of a, I mean, yeah, that covers a lot of square miles, but it kind of hits the marks though, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, for example, without impairing the ability to balance population or minority profile, if it made more sense to take some of this out of 1 and pull 1 up a little bit into 2 and balance up here, we can do that. The problem is we start getting into some very big census enumeration blocks over here that are hundreds of acres as opposed to a city block. And so if I take a little bit, I may get a much bigger bite than you want, but it won't take much population to balance it. So could I widen it? I could. We could do that. The only people who are ever going to know it got widened are y'all. There's no voter in any of your districts that can come close other than 3 to drawing it. And 3 is easy because it was kind of like an artist easel or paint box until we added this to it. But yeah, that's what I meant, color of the road.
Yeah.
If it being this narrow is troublesome for some reason. Now, one problem we've got is there's a big concentration of people right here. But not much over in this area, so it could be widened a little bit. We could figure out a place to balance that population. I mean, as I said, this is not a take it or leave it proposition, but whatever you end up with is going to look an awful lot like this, I think.
So all the dots there in the little bluish area, that's the minority, that's where the majority of the minorities are.
Every one of those dots.
On the other end of the spectrum, what are the implications to our citizens to know that the majority are all in area 3, is there, without being spread out, if you will?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, this is sort of Texas right now. And I've done hundreds of these, and very seldom do you find something where you don't have a significant concentration. May I look at this for just a minute with you? Well, I may want to look at my own sheet. Let me do that. I'm more familiar with what I've done. One of the issues is we can't move the people, but what we can do is split them. But one of the problems under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is when you have an insular concentration of minority residents where they have a history of success in electing a candidate of their choice and often a candidate of color. When you split that, they may no longer be able to do that. And that's called cracking. That's a violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Coming from the outside, I don't know what the sweet spot is on how many people it takes. But for example, if we need thousands of people in 3. If we don't come down here, everywhere we go lowers the minority profile of 3.
Right.
And there is no excuse for doing that. And if I were to go up here, down here, over here, up here, I mean, the only places I can go, any plaintiff's attorney would look at that and say, well, you had your mind. I mean, why did you, that's exactly the number of people you needed. Why did you not go down there? I don't have a reason. Now a reason would be if instead of going down here, I could leave this alone, which I can't because I've got to add thousands of people to it. But if this already had enough people, then if this also had enough people to be 2 minority districts, putting them together would be packing, that's also a violation of Section 2. That's also a violation. Our problem is there are not enough people here to make 2, and there are not enough people in the existing lines to satisfy the 1 person, 1 vote requirement. I have to bring more people in. If I don't bring in a high concentration of minority residents, I violate Section 2. So, I mean,
I know this
that's
is
the
not what you're
problem.
saying, but this is what my ears are hearing.
Okay.
It almost sounds as if, Area 3, that's the only area in our district where we're gonna get a person of color. I know that's not what you're saying, but that's what I'm hearing, that's what it feels like. That Area 3 is our most prominent area to get a person of color, and we wanna make sure we have enough other people of color, minorities, so that we can ensure that they elect the person of color that they want.
And there's not a way to say it where it's not going to sound like that. The act itself simply talks about electing a candidate of their choice, and the courts have always protected that choice. So whether that choice is for a person of color, a female, an Anglo, transgender, the key is not who gets elected. The key is did the voters get to elect the candidate of their choice. Where the Voting Rights Act becomes attentive to the candidate of their choice is where you've had a tradition of a minority district electing a minority candidate, and then you change it. The question has always become not will they no longer elect a minority candidate, but if that's always been the candidate of their choice, can they still elect the candidate of their choice? I understand what you're saying exactly, and there's no other way to hear that because, quite frankly, if you go back and read the legislative history of the Voting Rights Act, 65, 75, 80, 82, that's what the discussion was all about. And it was all about that because of Texas and other southern states focusing on minorities. So,
All right, that's all my questions.
Okay, well,
I have a question, and it's not about the map. I think, honestly, there's nothing else we could do. I don't have a problem with the map, but it doesn't really affect me except that one layer up there, and I'm fine with it. My question is about Area 4. I wasn't here 10 years ago. That's your green area up there.
Yeah.
But I'm sure when you did it, you looked at it. It looks on this map like, not right now, but, and maybe some now, but 10 years from now, if things were holding it, we're gonna actually have 2 districts that are gonna be in the situation that District 3 is in right now, that we're gonna have to make sure that it stays protected. Is that what I'm seeing with all the dots?
yeah, that's highly likely.
Okay.
That's highly likely. And I'll take Waco, Texas, for example, that I've done for 40 years. When I moved to Waco, we had a definite East Waco, which was thought of as African American, and we had a definite South Waco, which was thought of as Hispanic. Both of those are high minority profiles, but our highest minority district is in the middle, sort of like this. It's also District 4. And it has a higher minority profile of either 1 or 2 right now. And the result is because what we hope would happen and hope will continue to happen is East Waco loses its identity as a place where African Americans live, and it becomes more diverse. South Waco becomes more diverse than Hispanic, and the rest of Waco becomes more diverse as a consequence of people living where they want to live. Right up here, for whatever reason, and I don't know the demographics, but for whatever reason, that has been an area that's developed that way. The only thing that was strange about District 4 and again, clearly last time in doing this, I was influenced by where people live. And it's done nothing but become a little more dense in that period of time. The only thing about District 4 that really struggled with was, and I think here it was because we had an incumbent maybe, or someone who was going to run that lived over there. I don't remember what the details were. It's too long ago, and I've slept since then. And I apologize if I've said
I know
that.
why now. It makes sense.
Figured it out too.
I just figured that out, okay. Okay.
Do you have a chart, like an Excel chart, so we can see the population numbers?
Sure.
Yeah, we
I
would be
thought I
able to-
sent that along. I thought that was.
It wasn't in the set that you sent last time. so-
Well, they haven't changed since what I sent you for the first.
For the first one?
Yeah. I can.
Let me pull that up, then I'll have Erica project that.
Well, I can, we just plug my computer in, I'll do it, whatever you want to do.
That'd be great if you could.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be the easiest way to do it. I think just being able to see the actual numbers as well, and I think the board understands that all maps that you have here are all the same drawing, they're just different views. And this is what you're proposing, and I think that if we look at the numbers, we get a little
You want to sit down
prompt
there
here
and bring
more
it down there?
questions.
Wherever, I don't.
You
Yeah.
want to sit on the,
How about right here,
okay,
if that's okay?
sure. Oh, probably, can that go there?
This is right.
The interesting thing is, just
Excuse
based on
me.
that area, I feel like that's going to might continue to increase in density and potentially continue to decrease in.
Am I?
in-
It'll be up in a minute, I'm sure. Let's see here.
Well, yeah, area one.
There we go.
Yeah.
This is,
Cool.
With the accelerated growth that we're experiencing in 10 years, they're gonna be playing by different rules.
Yep.
Yeah, we're seeing that in the South now. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when I first got on the board, the
nope,
South
wrong
was
one.
pretty slow moving.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
You got some cute pictures going on.
See, I think here,
Yeah, I don't usually.
And you're at large.
All
Turned one, yeah, she turned one.
202
So all
square
it's gonna
miles.
be big landmass, no one.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, she's spoiled.
so now
Oh,
you're
let's-
starting to-
Jealous, signs from corner to corner.
That's
Right.
right.
30,000, right?
Display, where's
Oh, yeah.
display? Take me a moment or longer. Let's see here. Here we go.
She got a head, like, brain.
What is? If you've got a computer person here, I'm happy for them to help me fix this.
Yeah.
You trying to get to mirrored screens?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine's live, they can figure it out.
You want it to go up on the
It's just
screen?
about mirroring instead of,
Display.
Well, I'm gonna ask you a question.
Sure, there you go.
Yeah, right there.
Because I listened, this is the second time I
Thank
think
you.
I've heard you speak.
I really need
And
to.
I don't know anything about the voting rights act, never sat down and read it, never even looked at it actually. But it seems like it's race driven, right?
Well, it was initially. The courts have, yeah, thank you. It clearly was race-driven because the problem it was addressing was race-driven.
Yeah.
But it operates to protect everybody. And so, for example, one of the things that, if I didn't mention the other night, I should have, is, well, Section 2 and Section 5 require us to protect, they were focused on minority access. If all we pay attention to is minority access and everything else takes a back seat, that can be denial of equal protection to non-minorities, and the Supreme Court has held that is also unconstitutional, and it's also a violation of the Voting Rights Act. The reason that all the case law deals with minority access is because that's where all the inhibitions, where all the roadblocks have been placed. The South wasn't placing, until now, difficult problems for non-minorities to vote. Now we focus on not letting Republicans or Democrats vote too, no matter what their color is. So, I mean, we've got a rich history of trying to keep all the wrong people from voting. And while through the 60s and 70s it was focused on minority voters, it's now focused on people who have the wrong political ideas. So it certainly began that way. The main focus is still that way because it's still the predominant issue. And our Supreme Court held 2 years ago that discriminating on the basis of political parties is not unconstitutional, which I think was a mistake, but they're smarter than I am or they wouldn't be there. That's the one area where the politics can continue to discriminate without violating the Voting Rights Act, which is why when you see whatever side you're on, if you see a legislature making it harder for urban voters, their focus used to be on urban voters who tended to be minority.
Right.
Their focus now is on urban voters who tend to be Democrats. That's okay. That's not a violation of the Voting Rights Act yet. But ignoring all other principles except race or ethnicity, Supreme Court said that's a violation of voting rights, and that's also a violation of 5th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Now, then this map falls where? What, I mean, you said 10% is presumptively constitutional.
Right now, your maximum deviation is 42.18% as you stand, okay? When we, in fact, this is the Section 5 submission from last time. That's what we used to have to send to Washington, D.C. And the last time, when we finished and gave a plan, those lines had a 7.12% maximum deviation. So in a 10-year period, they've gone up by a factor of almost 6. Okay? Minority profile of 27.8, well, still over here.
Erica, we gotta project a little different here.
Yeah.
You gotta make it a projection.
There we go. All right. Right now, we have a minority profile of 38.44%. In 2011, of the 2010 census, it was 30.85, so it hasn't gone up much. Okay? At that point, this one had an 18.29%. This is 9% higher this time. Because while your total population hadn't gone up as much, the balance between or among race and ethnicity has changed considerably. 2 is 43.98. It's now it's 32.59. It's actually gone down. Minority profile. 3 at 58.79 is now 55.86. So it's gone down too. But 3 was over 2,500 people low, which is why we had to go down to that southwest. They go somewhere southwest. And then 4, 38% was 29%, so it's 9% higher, minority profile. And 5 was 29, it's now 19. I mean, it was 19, it's now 29, so it's gone up.
So it's the standard deviation from census to census.
Census deviation,
Right?
your deviation this time is 42.18. Your deviation last time was 51.88. So the deviation of The 10-year-old plan last time was higher than the deviation of the 10-year-old plan is this time.
Can you show us the numbers where you have it drawn now, or what it would look like?
Yes, I can, if you'll just scroll down a little bit.
Okay, I think that's what everybody's got.
Maybe.
It's probably 2 slides down, I guess. There we go.
Okay, so this is
4.27.
how you've driven it now, you got it down to 4.2% deviation.
I do.
Okay.
And, you know, we're about 55, we're at 54.98. So maintain that, and moved in almost 2,500 people. That was the only direction you could go to move that many people without this dropping precipitously. The rest stayed reasonably close to where they were.
So when I read this chart, I look up at the top, it says ideal, that's ideal, 12,731.8.
That's right.
If we were perfectly balanced, every voting district would have
Take
that.
63,659 divided by 5.
Yep.
And then the deviation we're talking about is 10% of that, or it's 1,273. And we're at 544, and before that, we were at multiples of that.
So this is a way better map. It's way more balanced. It's constitutionally protecting us.
If you just look at the numbers.
That's right.
Yeah. But it's more than the numbers.
What is it?
Well, when we take a look at the shape of the map, the shape of the map's wonky.
Oh, yeah, you weren't here for that part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
What does that have to do?
admittedly, the shape of the map is wonky.
Yeah.
So is our new, the District 54, 55 map's pretty wonky.
I'm not saying that's right either, but.
Sometimes you gotta draw pretty lines to make things happen.
Yeah, if you look, Chris, on this one, you weren't here for this part, but now, the first one you have there, actually the second one too, districts 3 and 4 have the biggest minority
Right.
population, and what he was saying earlier is, you know, if you do anything that distorts that, then we get in violation of the Constitution.
So that's kind of really, honestly, it really is the number that's the most important.
Well, sometimes pretty isn't pretty does.
But, I mean, the analysis, when you do this, you put the dots on there, and then
I mean, that's the point of doing a scattergram like that.
that's what I'm saying, you look at the dots and say, well, I've gotta make sure that I don't dilute those dots too much.
Yeah, I mean, once you put those on the
That's why I
map,
say it's race driven, you know?
It's-
Yeah.
it's both. And if it were only race-driven, we'd have an issue with the reverse gerrymander.
I'm with you.
But other factors were taken in, protected incumbency, protected core constituencies. Came up with lines that are identifiable on the ground, except for this one up in 4 that's a survey line.
But also landmass, I mean, 3 and 4 are the most densely populated areas that we have.
Yeah.
I mean, they just are, like my area is spread out, the 2 is spread out because there's a huge area of 2 that nobody, Messer Ranch, that whole area, everybody's living on 5 to 10 acres out there.
So the objective today is for bringing you in to make sure that this passes constitutional muster, right?
I think this is, yeah, I mean, that is, the objective from my standpoint was to try to give you some comfort with the rationale behind this, that it wasn't serendipitous that it ended up looking this way, and it wasn't that I was not aware of how uncouth it looked, which is how I presented it the very first time I showed you. It is not a pretty thing. It's just better than the alternatives I've been able to find. And as I said, we could widen that neck a little bit, but sort of, you know, legally it doesn't matter, as long as we stay true to our deviation, and widening that neck is going to have no impact on the minority profile unless we have to run out forward to do it.
And I think you mentioned last time when you factor in the lake and the weird land swap and wildflower and then the weird thing down I-35, there's some weird just lines in our district boundaries anyway, so that's gonna wonky things up as it is.
And school districts almost always end up looking a little strange.
I was gonna ask that, like, how common is this?
No, it's very common. I don't have any school district in Ardell County, but Clinton County has 17 independent school districts. And they just go until they hit something that stops them, another school district. And a lot of those, like a lot of the little small communities, were formed as white flight school districts and communities back in the 60s and 70s. So, I mean, you can't pull race and ethnicity out of the history of this, but it really, it's the driver for the Voting Rights Act, but the Constitution in this setting is really colorblind. It's just, you hear most about it because we're not protecting political parties, and the only other groups that are being discriminated against traditionally have been racial and ethnic minorities.
Chris, you weren't in here, what questions do you have?
Did we, already talk about the island between you and I?
Not really. I mean, I don't think there's anything we can do about it.
But is there really nothing we can do about, like, the fact that there's a part of Area 4 that is completely surrounded? Like, Area 4 is not contiguous?
I don't think that it actually affects either one of our numbers, does it, from what you know of? No, that was there because, and it's not this is, by the way, not being ugly, but he said something that rang true, and now I understand that you do not draw lines that will adversely affect an incumbent. That incumbent lived in that area. It was either Mr. Digby or Randy lived in that island. That's the reason that island, I think, existed to begin with. So if they do away with it, as long as it doesn't affect the beautification.
I was gonna say, like, is there a way that we can make that island go away?
And one,
She's putting her back up. Yeah, she's gonna
I'm sorry.
go to map
That's
D.
all right. Did you say D or B?
D.
Okay, so
I can read it here.
Where I'm coming from is it has to look wonky.
This one?
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
But that really does look ugly.
Erica,
That's
make it
suspicious.
full. Right.
The problem is, and I'm not saying we can't vary it some, because this is even the second highest minority profile right now. It's the third highest.
on the right, I think.
But it's the highest concentration.
Yep.
So what are we gonna take out of it without saying that we wanted something that looked nicer, even though it has an adverse effect on the minority profile?
I mean, if you check the number of dots, I mean, I don't have a number, but it's less than 30 easily. So what if we took up the donut?
Which area are you talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at these.
Oh, you talking about this?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, yeah, different island, it's a mini island.
Oh,
Yeah.
get rid of it. It's not really an island.
It's not
It's,
good.
all of this right here is in 4. There's not the problem with this is that this is one great, around that is one big election, census enumeration block. And on your existing line, there's not an island there. What this line represents is all of that, both in this and in the existing, is in 4.
Okay.
There is no island. It's just this software doesn't allow me to break a census block. And so what would have to happen is this census block goes way over here like this. We would have to count those people and determine how many live west of that line, which is where the line is now.
Okay, so the line, do you mind if I
No,
jump up
you
there?
don't have to. It's your board.
All right, so-
Board
So you're saying this lime green line right here,
is the,
and everything to the west, actually all of this, even though it's colored pink, is area 4?
Yeah.
All right, well then I have an issue.
okay. But what that tells us, again, is
Couldn't tell from that.
No, I can tell from that, yeah.
it doesn't matter right now because our tolerances are close enough that however many people there's not gonna affect them.
Okay.
But when the time comes to draw the final line, if that's where the line is, then a school bus driver, a letter carrier, somebody familiar with that area needs to tell us of the X people who live in this larger area, how many of them live on this side, and about how many of them are white, African American, Hispanic, Asian, American Indian, and we'll just draw that line and we'll say that those are the estimates of the numbers. So I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were talking about the whole thing being an island.
But that's not something that you're wanting to happen. Now that you understand that line, even though the colors were different, it created that little.
Yeah, it was the colors that were.
Yeah,
good.
the software.
So it's, so it's
You're
caught
good
knows
with
the
the
map.
line as
It
it
needs to
is.
be.
You don't
Yeah,
need-
no, yeah, but the line can stay where it is. I need to
We're
look
good
through
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, doing that way would be a violation of state law, because your districts have to be
That's
contiguous.
kind of why I didn't like it, like.
And we're lawful for a while today.
So,
And then I got here, sorry.
I got a question for you, and it goes back to a comment you made earlier. And again, I don't have a role, this is a map for the Board of Trustees. But you mentioned communities of interest. Can you define that for me? Because that's where I'm struggling a little bit with this, because I feel like with the proposed changes to Area 3, I don't know that, I need to know more about what communities of interest are.
A community of interest to rise to the level of concern means you've got a cohesive group that tends to vote in a similar fashion. And by splitting them or by packing more people into them, you impair their ability to elect a candidate of their choice. A community of interest like using whole election precincts, not moving polling places, not carrying a vote. All of those are factors that can justify not having as high minority profile as you could get out, not balancing population quite as well as you could have. But of all the communities of interest that the Voting Rights Act concerns itself with all due respect, racial minorities and ethnic minorities are the pinnacle groups of that interest. And so I understand that it's I'm sorry, I'm getting a little casual. I understand that it's a presumption to say, okay, well, there's a high minority population down there, so all those people are going to want to be up here. I don't know that they all are going to want to be up there. What I know is if I don't put them up there, then I've got to be able to explain why. As a board, you may know why. You may know they don't really, but then I've got to move 2,300 people in from somewhere else and think about looking at a federal judge and saying, Your Honor, we believe that it's better to reduce the minority profile by 15% than to move these people up there. It's not that you can't do it, it's that I can't do it. But if the board thinks that that's true and is willing to make that a basis of it and put it in the record as why they've done it, you're perfectly free to.
You know what, Matt, I think the best example of communities of interest that we've heard, and we heard argued, was the whole, and obviously the state legislature does not care. That was the argument that East Bell County was a community of interest versus West Bell County, that East Bell County is basically, its own little block of people. Non-minority didn't care about that, they're just like, East Bell County is one thing, West Bell County was another. Of course, state legislators like, yeah, we don't care, we'll just draw it this way anyways. But that was what they discussed in that time when we were there.
I guess the only concern that I have, and again, this isn't my map, and I know that. But the only concern that I have is when I look at Area 3 now, and I know that the way you got that number of people, an additional 2,600 people in there, was by adding a new housing development that's to the south that isn't really a part of anything in Area 3 right now. That's where I was trying to go and understand that notion of communities of interest. Because Area 3 for me right now represents a lot of the heart of Belton in the city of Belton. And while we're seeing increased growth to the south there, Area 3 to me doesn't seem like it, adding that really fits with that.
Well, let me play a game with you for a minute. The other place you pick up people are up here. Leave this into. Now, where are you going to take this where you say they're picking up a community of interest? I mean, is there a community of interest? I mean, this has been this way for 10 years. So there's no connection over that 10-year period with those, like there's not down here. There's a reason to go down here under the Voting Rights Act. To not do that, I think we'd have to have a pretty strong argument that for some reason it made more sense to go another direction.
So what you're saying, Matt, is your concern is that demographically speaking, 3 Creeks may not fit what the current Area 3's population density or demographics is gonna be.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so when I see that, and I think of that voting area in area 3, I think of, like I said, the heart of the city of Belton in there. So in my mind, it makes more sense to go north, but I understand the two things. It doesn't make more sense when you say the number of people and the population of the voters of color in those areas. I understand why you were saying you gotta go south.
Well, but let me give you an example of where it might make sense, because when I'm in Waco, I can't tell this. What if the people who have studied this and understand it say, you know what, Mike? That may look good to a law professor out of Waco. These people are not gonna vote for the same candidate. And what you've done by pulling them in here, you've actually made it harder. The fact that they may share a racial or ethnic background is inadequate.
Mhm.
And if you could establish that this actually hurts instead of helps, you're halfway there. The other half, though, is this would help more than that. And I don't know what the commonality is in those, but if you can make that argument, and if you can have evidence that supports it, you can make that work.
But when you look at the map A, and if that is a true representation of, let's just say, Hispanic population, I don't see any difference in the density on that map
There really
of
is.
population. It
But-
seems to me to be basically clustered about the same, right?
Yeah, I think the argument Matt may be making, and maybe others, is that sharing a racial or ethnic identity may not translate into favoring the same candidate. And if you could show that going in some other direction did a better job of that, and if you've got the evidence to make your case, then you've got an argument in favor of doing that differently, Matt. You sure do. But what you've got an awful lot of data that suggests to the contrary. And my experience has been it's hard to find a lot of people who are qualified to do more than share their personal politics when you start asking what direction to go. I know it sounds like I'm in here saying, this is it, choke it down. I'm not trying to say that. And I'm not trying to poo-poo other alternatives. I'm just trying to be realistic, if I can.
So if we were to cut the Three Creeks out of 3 and move it back into 2, then you would really have to swing way out either side to make it, to bring that number into kind of make it.
Yeah, if I
About
went,
where you're
if
at,
I
right?
went north, we'd have to pull 5 up, so we'd still have a way to get through that passageway.
But you could easily, if you cut that, down this way, got rid of the Three Creeks, you could come this way.
As long as I didn't
That's
go over
into-
it.
That's over into Temple though, the shallow ford, that's over in Temple off of, Taylor Valley Road. And I think that's basically about the same type of neighborhoods as you're dealing with Three Creeks. So going east wouldn't help you any. And then going west, when you get out on the Wheat Road and
Not a
get
lot
out
of
there,
people out there.
that's not gonna help you there.
There are not a lot of people out there.
So I don't know really where you'd balance it if you cut that out.
And then you end up with a true, right now we have a half donut hole. But that's just where 3 is. But yeah, if you did that, if you cut that out and then put 3 up, now you have 2 truthfully is wrapping all the way around. Now you have an island.
Well, of course, 3's been an island for.
It has been, no, it has been.
Yeah, it's been
And
an
now
island.
you're bringing it down to the southern
Yeah.
border of our district.
The only thing, however many people we're talking about, have to be replaced. Now, I don't have to go to where it's within 63, we've got some room. So we wouldn't have to put as many people in as we took out, but we need to get pretty close.
We're about half built out right now in Three Creeks. We're at 750 basically of the 1500s.
Yeah.
So that's gonna be a moving target over the next 10 years.
Yeah, and I think 4 will be
Yeah.
too.
On
We're
both
just
sides.
gonna
Yeah, we can't even look at 10 years out for now.
No,
There's no way we
Yeah,
can.
change
They
from
had
the last
done that
10 years
prior, they'd be
compared to this
like,
10 years is gonna be nothing.
Yeah,
The last 10
I
years.
think Central Texas, I think that's where we are right
I'm good with map A1 as on
I guess the only other question I would have, just, and I know the answer, but I think we have to ask it, is if this is where your professional opinion comes in, if for some unknown reason, somebody decides to challenge this,
I think you,
no problem at
I didn't say that.
all.
The last paragraph of my contract says.
Yeah, I know contract. But you're confident in this though, that if it's challenged, it meets the standard?
I know of no reason in case law that would suggest any problem with this. And I'll say, doing them since the late 70s, I've had several challenges, and there's never been a successful challenge. And there's never been a Justice Department refusal to pre-clear the plans that I've set up there. There are hundreds of them. The only time there have been successful challenges to plans I've worked on were for the state. That's where they pay me for my advice, and they know it.
What other questions? Chris?
Maybe
Now, moving forward,
Yeah.
moving forward now, then the next meeting, this becomes an action item.
So this would, we would do in, Mr. Morrison would probably know better than I, but I believe we do a public hearing on the map so that they actually, the community can weigh in. And, then it would be an action item and, I think a resolution is what it actually ends up being.
How does that public hearing work? How does that, just so I understand that?
I'd have to go back and take a look, obviously, it's the first time I've been through it, so.
You would post it as you would any other public hearing. You would probably post it bilingually. You wouldn't just run, the standard school board notice in paper. We typically suggest provide a little bit of an ad.
Right. Well, our council will tell us what to do on that. It's just when I hear public hearing, I think of, we're going back to the fitness center, we're gonna display the maps and talk to people about it, which
That's
not
right.
me.
That's right, that's what you're gonna be doing.
Did we bring you in for that? Because none of this segment's qualified to stand up there and talk.
Yeah, we just have to find time I get down here. For
Okay.
sure. I mean, I did a public hearing at Waco ISD last night, MCC the night before, Hill
Okay.
County the morning of. I'm doing public hearings till the lowest level.
When do these have to be submitted for final?
You're not in a hurry. I mean, you're gonna be calling your election in January, so you wanna have this done by then.
We can vote on it in December.
That means between now and December, we have to have a public hearing, which leaves us the month of November.
That's right.
That's it.
Or beginning of December.
So we need to get on his docket.
Yeah. I'm right.
Connie's working under my.
Because none of us are gonna stand up there.
Connie's telling
You
me.
don't want to. Yeah, Connie's working under my dates.
This being a public hearing, do you have to allow the public more time to look at this rather than you're just saying 72 hours?
I think, I think Mr. Morrison could probably tell us a little bit about best practice. I think it would be wise probably to do it where it's not quite like we've done the last public hearing that we just had and stuff, where it's really, hey, there's some maps up, we let people come in, voice their concerns, we call a meeting to order, we ask, public comments and kind of questions, that kind of stuff. So it's really probably a standalone item as well.
Usually what would help is, when you're ready to set your hearing, put some of these maps on the website, put a notice out that the maps are available for people to log on to and take a look at. I'll send you a sample of it. I mean, it's a very simple notice. We're gonna have a public hearing in all time. I mean, it's a little more than that, but, there's not a magic to how this public hearing works as opposed to others. And for whatever reason, there's not been, I've had, I guess, 6 public hearings in the last 2 weeks. I've had one question in 6 of them, and that may not be your experience, but right now the public seems to be just pretty tired of this stuff.
Along with providing information to the public, do we send along some of the information he's provided as far as like kind of the reasoning why, so that when they're looking at this, they're not starting to formulate accusations or thoughts in their heads on
I don't know about
this?
sending, I think we may want to have some of these same materials, and so all of this is already public, this is a public meeting right now, so these are all out there in the public, and this discussion is as well. I don't know exactly about sending, I'll have to see what best practice is early.
Remember how confusing, and again, I'll accept responsibility for those maps, but remember how confusing it was when I first worked with y'all? And the maps were a big part of that, I know. But there's some risk to too much explanation that is too little in fact, as opposed to being present and when somebody has an issue, instead of them stewing on it for 4 or 5 days, it can be addressed. And so I think the maps, I think the population breakdowns before and after, and you can pull a couple of the slides off the PowerPoint that address the balancing population and complying with constitutional and voting rights act requirements. And once people have a chance to see one, first of all, if you're not really familiar with what it looks like now, it'd be hard to notice anything different except right here. And if they see those side by side, and then there's showing that the population's been balanced and the Voting Rights Act requirements have been addressed, then that, my experience has been that satisfies most fair-thinking people. And I'll be happy to work with Connie and Matt on gathering some materials together.
So we do this in one biannual meeting, or do we do 2 meetings?
I think we do one. I think that would probably be, I think we do one, we would advertise it both in English and Spanish.
One thing that is often done is to post it for possible action in the first. Because if it's posted for a public hearing and action, people could conclude that the public hearing really didn't matter. You post it for possible action. If people raise issues we hadn't really thought about, you can postpone a vote. If everybody seems copacetic with it, then you can go ahead and move on to a vote. But I think it's a good signal to send that we might act, but we're pending the public hearing.
Thank you.
All right, if that's the case, thank you.
Think back.
Time is 4:15, meeting's adjourned.